Hello, denizens of the internet. Welcome to another episode of Art Tips I Wish I'd Known When I Was 13. This is a very special episode in that it might actually have some practical application somewhere. Welcome to Surviving Adobe Illustrator. Now, if you've had the misfortune of encountering this program in the wild, you're probably familiar with its weird tool system, its rather clunky user interface, and just generally the frustration it causes. Which is why my number one tip for surviving Adobe Illustrator is stop using it. Seriously, stop using Adobe Illustrator from start to finish on your projects. It's an amazing vector graphics tool, but it's not the right place to be sketching or even generating ideas. So, with that cardinal rule in mind, let's look at two possible approaches to using this program. Approach number one, photo bashing. You can use a variety of photos, whether it be one you take, a one from the Creative Commons, provided you're following its licensing, or a photo from the public domain. Regardless of where you get the photo, it's really quite simple. You just take the photo and you trace over it using the pen tool. The shape builder tool and other tools to make shapes or texture the image appropriately such that it gives you the effect that you're looking for. There's also a simplify tool in Illustrator in case you want your silhouette to become simpler, or you can manually delete points, which I've had much better luck with. What I have to pick with Illustrator, or possibly the way it's taught, is that there's a lot of niche tools that are sort of showcased as things that you're going to need every single day. But frankly, in the past 4 or 5 years of using Illustrator, I've used the gradient tool maybe twice, and one of those times was really ill-advisable, and yet there it is on the sidebar just taunting us. So I guess as you find your own workflow and your own way through the program, you're probably going to notice that there are tools that you use all the time and tools that you never use, and so you shouldn't feel bad that there's some tools on that sidebar that frankly you can't understand. Now I'll very briefly talk about what I'm doing in the background here in this photo bashing method, and I'll try and make a point to point out what tools I'm actually using and what tools in general I think are worth knowing about in Illustrator, especially as a beginner who's not necessarily looking to make the most polished images, but rather get something that looks sort of acceptable. One tool which I find useful is the pen tool with the little line, because it allows you to place anchor points which are usually on a curve, but when double tapped become an anchor point which is going to be on a straight line or creating sort of a solid angle. This is really helpful for organic shapes like cats or human beings. Another tool I'm using here is the transparency tool, which is actually its own separate tab in the default workflow. When you go to it, when you're clicking on any picture or shape in Illustrator, or pressing Shift to select a variety of them, you're able to bring down their transparency, which here I'm using to make the photo less visible, but can also be used to create an overlapping effect in your drawings. Another tool worth noting here is the shape builder tool, which allows you to take a group of closed points and turn them into a shape, which allows you to set the fill of this object the same way you'd set it on a circle or any other closed shape in Illustrator. The second technique is basically the same as the first, except for, you guessed it, you just draw the thing before you quote-unquote photo bash it in Illustrator. The reasons to do this, even though it takes slightly longer, is that you don't need to be bound by literal things you can find, which means you're going to have your original designs being brought into Illustrator, as well as figurative things that you couldn't find on the internet. And also, frankly, I just think it produces a bit better results because anybody can trace an outline, but not everybody has your style. Now, don't worry if your sketch that you're making isn't perfect or doesn't look good at all. You can really fix up most of that in Illustrator, and frankly, you're just trying to get a feel for sort of the bigger shapes that you could be building in the program in a much freer way than if you were doing this starting off in the program itself. Pen and paper prototyping, whether you decide to take a photo and bring it into Illustrator or not, is also super helpful because it allows you to get a feel for those shapes as well. The next part is basically the same as what I did before, so I'll just speed it up a bit more and use this space to talk about some other tips and tricks I find really helpful in Illustrator. My first tip is ABL, which stands for Always Be Locking. Anytime you finish a shape and want to start a new one, honestly, just go to a new layer and lock this one up. It's so helpful when you're doing backgrounds or when you're trying to make a shape on top of another shape, or especially when you're using the pen tool. It likes to try and connect itself to random parts of the last thing you've drawn, but if you lock what you've been doing, it's so much easier to not have to deal with it. My last tip is a two-parter, and that's if it looks bad, delete it, and sort of the old adage, less is more. Honestly, this was the other thing that was really difficult for me in Illustrator, was learning that if something looks bad, well, changing the colors can sort of help you. You just need to get rid of it, even if it took you a long time to make, and even if it makes your design more complex, that doesn't mean it needs to stay in. In vector graphics, unfortunately, simplicity is the name of the game. For me, that does mean failing fairly often, but I find that it's much better when I prototype and then just fail with the simple shapes that I can make in a second in Illustrator, so I'm not attached to them. Hopefully something in here helped with your Illustrator woes, and if not, make sure to leave a comment telling me how much you hated this video. That's all I've got. Thanks for watching. Bye.